Welcome, everybody. We'll be starting in just a couple minutes, just letting everybody trickle in. Just wanted to let you know that this lecture is being recorded by the AIA. It is a live presentation, so recording by attendees is strictly prohibited. Thank you.
Great. There are a bunch of people still coming in, I think, but I'm Letitia LaFollette, the president of the Archaeological Institute of America, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our fourth Archaeology Abridged mini lecture by Dr. Elizabeth M. Greene, entitled Living on the Edge of the Roman Empire. We're very excited to have you all here. We know that there probably are a number of you who have not actually attended or listened to the earlier Archaeology Abridged series we did in the fall. And so we will actually put in the chat a link so you can actually go and hear some of those if you are interested. We also will be mentioning the next Archaeology Abridged lecture by Dr. Greene, which will be happening on the 11th of February. So I'm still seeing people coming in. I think we want to give them just a few more minutes. Hopefully everyone can hear and are using the chat function to send their questions at the end. I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful vice president. Thank you, Bettina, for telling us that you can hear. I'm going to turn it over to our vice president for outreach and education, Laura Rich, who is going to introduce Dr. Greene. Laura.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're safe and warm if you're in snow or wherever you happen to be hiding. I'm in rain. I am Laura Rich. I'm the Vice President of Outreach and Education, and we are in for a treat today. I first met Dr. Greene at Vindolanda, and so we are inextricably tied to this amazing site. Dr. Greene is a Canada Research Chair in Roman Archaeology and Associate Professor at the University of Western Ontario. She earned her PhD from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Department of Classics, and has taught in the Classics Department at Western for 10 years. Her excavation and research specialize in the Roman provinces and frontiers, with particular focus on the Roman Britain and the dynamic military communities that inhabited the frontiers of the Northwest provinces. Dr. Greene has been part of the archaeological team at Vindolanda since 2002 and led the excavations in the North Field area of the site for a decade. She is currently the principal investigator of the Vindolanda Archaeological Leather Project and co-director of the Vindolanda Field School. Her research has been funded extensively by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council Canada and the Ontario Ministry of Research and Innovation. Her archaeological research has been published in international venues since 2012, much of which focuses on the social role of women, children, and families in Roman military communities. Dr. Greene has been a national lecturer for the Archaeological Institute of America since 2014 and has given talks to local societies across the United States and Canada. She is also a member of the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists, and her research is regularly featured on podcasts, radio, online, and print media. Dr. Greene has been a member of the AIA since graduate school and has advocated for archaeology and the AIA in several roles in both local societies and at the national level. We are so lucky to get to hear all about her research. And with that, Beth, take it away.
Thank you so much. This is super exciting. It's so exciting to have so many people on here in our newfound world of Zoom webinars that we never knew we could talk to so many people all at once. So thank you to everyone for coming. I'd like to start a little bit with a few thank yous, in fact, starting with the AIA, of course. Thanks for putting this together and giving me such a big audience. You know, never thought this would happen, but you know, lo and behold, hundreds and hundreds of people. When we used to be in rooms with, 50, or when we had 120, we would think this is really fantastic. So this is really great. So thanks to the AIA for putting this all together. The funny thing about the Zoom world is that you end up with your parents out there in the Zoomiverse, if you will. And so this is actually one of the very first times that I have been able to publicly thank my parents for the unflagging support that they gave me through all of the years of graduate school, and coming home and saying, I want to be a classics major, which throw some people off, but parents, don't worry, it all works out just fine. And maybe you'll be thanked publicly like this one day. So I want to thank them, my parents, and I should throw my father-in-law in there as well, who have just been absolutely super through graduate school, and the support has been fantastic. The funny thing is that my parents did not actually hear about this talk from me, sorry guys, but rather they got an email from their local historical society in Sudbury, Massachusetts. And so I also want to take this opportunity to thank everyone out there who has been supporting local societies, whether that's your local AIA society or your local history society, but supporting heritage and archaeology and history and exploration and discovery of the past. So I just want to thank everyone, however you came to this talk today, whether through your local AIA society or another local, thank you for supporting heritage, and thank you for supporting the endeavors that all of us are doing. And these thanks, of course, would not be complete without thanking the Vindolanda Trust. So I have worked with the excellent folks at the Vindolanda Trust for almost 20 years, and none of my research would be possible without them. So just a big, big shout out and a big thanks to the folks at Vindolanda. And also the research community in Rome and Britain. You know, they brought in this outsider, this American who now lives in Canada. And I just want to thank everyone in that research community for bringing me in and being so welcoming and making such a great place for this kind of research. So without further ado, because we are on Archaeology Abridged, I think many of you have maybe joined us for lunch, and that's a great way to spend your lunch, I think. I want to start just with one of the spectacular photos of Vindolanda. We have a great guy who takes our aerial shots, Adam Stamford with Aerial Cam. He does these fantastic shots, and this is one of my very favorites from Vindolanda. The sun is rising over the east, and it really gives you a sense of perhaps how you may have approached the site. And you might be thinking, well, they wouldn't have been in a drone that high up. But in fact, if you are standing on the hills outside, not at this particular point, at this particular spot, but the hill up above, the one that you can see the sun rising over, Barkham Hill, if you're standing up there, you get these wonderful views of this landscape. So one of the reasons Laura was just saying why you're in for a treat is that some of these landscapes and the shots I'm about to show you are just really amazing. It's been a privilege to work in this area for so long. And of course, I haven't been there now for over a year, and I really miss it. I mean, these viewpoints and perspectives are quite amazing. But I first need to be a little bit boring and zoom you out with a map. So those of you who have come to Vindolanda, I suspect that a number of people out there right now have been to Vindolanda, have maybe hiked Hadrian's Wall. Maybe you hiked Hadrian's Wall and you bypassed Vindolanda. Shame on you. It's one of the best sites in the whole area. But a lot of people have visited there, and I want to make sure that I'm also talking to the people who have not been there and have maybe absolutely no idea what I'm talking about and just really like archaeology. So Vindolanda is up on the frontier in Roman Britain. So the Roman Empire is absolutely massive. Everything that you're looking at right here, practically, not the entire thing, is the Roman Empire. So if we can think about Britain up here, not Ireland, but all the way down through Spain and North Africa, and all through here in the Middle East, in this part of Western Asia and modern Turkey, this was all the Roman Empire. Now, if I zoom in a little bit, Vindolanda is right there, all the way up at the top, not the very top, because there was a short period of time where the frontier pushed a little bit north, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But the island of Britannia was conquered by the Romans in 43 CE, and they made it up to this frontier location. They made it up to what they kind of considered the edge up here on this northwest corner of the Roman Empire in around the 70s and sort of consolidated through the 80s CE. Now, I mentioned that slightly more northern line right up there. There's something called the Antonine Wall in the mid-2nd century. They tried and they built a bunch of forts, and that never lasted very long, maybe around roughly 20 years. And they come back down to this line right here, which is where the Vindolanda story is really starts, and the story of the frontier in Britain starts. Now, most people are familiar with Hadrian's Wall. So I'm going to talk about Hadrian's Wall. That is, in fact, the very definitive frontier that was built by Hadrian in the 120s. Well, by Hadrian, he ordered it, other people built it. It was in the 120s CE, and it ran right along there. And as you can see, Vindolanda is right there, smack in the middle of that. In this area, this area we call the central sector of Hadrian's Wall. So Hadrian's Wall is still an incredibly impressive monument, and helped by the fact that it is in one of the most amazing landscapes that anyone can imagine, both a historical landscape, an archaeological landscape, and a natural landscape. And one of the things that makes it so impressive is that in the central sector here, the wall that Hadrian built it sits right on top of what we call the wind sill. So this is a geological formation, and it dates to the end of the Carboniferous period, so nearly 300 or roughly 300 million years old. And right on top of that Carboniferous period pile of rocks, this wall of rocks, the Romans decided, hey, you know what? Let's build another 15 feet on top of that. Why not? And that's such a Roman thing. That is to me like the ultimate sign of being Roman. You know what? We need to make more of an impact in the landscape. So let's build another 15 feet of stone right on top of this 100-foot wall of stone through that central sector. And you can really get that sense in these images. There is the wind sill, and the wall would have run right over the top there, and so on and so forth as you move through the landscape. And then a really good view near Steel Rig right here, which is one of the kind of major stopping points on your wall hike. You can really get a sense of that depth there. So the wind sill is incredibly impressive, and with the wall on top of it, one can only imagine what it will have looked like as it snaked its way through the landscape and across this wind sill and across the landscape. So the wall does roll through this area. Now we're also in the Northumberland National Park at this point. So you might be thinking, wow, there are not very many houses around, and you're absolutely right. There isn't much to be seen in this area. There are some wonderful pubs and absolutely super Airbnbs, regular old B&Bs. I'm sure there's some Airbnbs, regular B&Bs. It's a great place to visit, but because it's a national park designated area, it doesn't have a great deal of modern buildings. So you get some older farms that you can see off in the background over here on this one. But in fact, we do think that this area had a higher population in the Roman and probably even the medieval period than it does now. So that's something to be said. Why also you can really enjoy this landscape. Now you'll probably be sharing the Hadrian's Wall path with quite a few people, but it's never heaving. You can always get your space, and the hike along the Hadrian's Wall path is absolutely incredible these days. And you can see a few people doing that in these images here. Now, the other amazing thing about Hadrian's Wall is that it follows the terrain wherever it needs to go. It goes up the crags and down the crags. And one thing that you're seeing over here in this picture is one of what we call the 9 nicks of Thirlwall. Those are also geological formations, just much more recent. The last ice age basically left behind these large lakes. And when those lakes burst through the wind sill, they came through these areas here and created these what we now call nicks that are dips in the landscape. Well, Hadrian's Wall said, no problem. The builders of Hadrian's Wall, I should say, let's not personify the wall. The builders of Hadrian's Wall said, no problem at all. We're just going to keep going with it. And so for those of you who have seen this landscape, and for those of you who have not, I tried with this picture on the right to get you a view of exactly how they just marched right up these cliffs. It's an absolutely incredible landscape. So when you hike it, you also do need to hike those areas as well. There is something that we call the low road in a lot of the areas, and you can take that, but I don't know, do you deserve the beer at the end of the day then? I don't know. I think that really you want to, like my students, I make them all push through these tough areas. The wall is also garrisoned. One of the most sort of the best way to exemplify that terrain that I'm talking about. and the fact that the Romans built whatever needed to be built wherever is this right here. The wall was garrisoned by forts all along the way. There's roughly sort of 7 to 8 miles, this notion of maybe a day's hike between major fort installations. And you're looking at the one called Housesteads right here, which is one of the other most famous sites, one of the other most famous forts in the area, together with Vindolanda and places like Chester's. But you can really see how this fort is breaking its back right over. This is an image from Google Earth. It's breaking its back right over that ridge. And anyone who's been there could also attest to the fact that this is a commitment. This visit is not easy. You buy your ticket all the way down here, actually, and beyond there. And you have to walk all the way up and then all the way up, and you come through the gate here, and then you're faced with this steep hill to get up to the top. And the buildings are just built right on these slopes. It's really incredible. So it really shows off the kind of Roman ingenuity in building on hills. And they said, no problem, we'll take care of this. And we're putting that fort exactly where it is supposed to be in the plan. So you've got forts every, say, 7 to 8 miles or so, something like this. And then every mile, go figure, we have something called a mile castle. And that is a smaller garrison, as you can see in this terrific reconstruction. I love this reconstruction. I always have to point out that that's from historic England, who used to be called English Heritage, if you visited England maybe 10 years ago or something. And this guy, Peter Lorimer, makes these wonderful reconstructions, and this is one of them here, where you can really get a sense of how this was a living space. So the mile castles were every mile between the forts, and they had barracks, and soldiers would stay there, and they would sort of garrison these spaces in between these forts. So those are the mile castles. And then in between there, you have turrets. So these watchtowers that guarded the frontier, and they're placed between each mile castle. You have 2 of them placed between. So you have mile castle would have a number like 37 is one of the famous ones. And then your next turret is 37A and 37B, and so on and so forth. The turrets are really interesting. So there's a few of them that actually predate Hadrian's Wall, and I'll be talking about that period in just a little bit. But they are built right into the wall. These, however, don't have gates. They don't have doors that go through the wall. So this is not a point where you can cross the wall, where the mile castles and the forts were. There were gates in all of those. So that's how they garrisoned the wall. That's what Hadrian's Wall looks like. I want to, though, pull you a little bit forward, because what a lot of people aren't aware of, because the wall garners so much interest and so many tourists, and it's such a great site. But places like Vindolanda predate the wall by nearly 50 years. So in fact, we have what we call the early frontier in this area. We call it the Steingate frontier. That's a later medieval name or of some sort. And Vindolanda is actually, the story of Vindolanda begins much earlier, before Hadrian's Wall. And that started in around 85 CE. And it was part of this, line that you see right here. So the orange dot, sorry, let me get on the right screen. The orange, or the green dot, that's Hadrian's Wall. And then underneath you have this purple line. And that is in fact that earlier road that we know ran through this central area. And Vindolanda is actually part of that early occupation of this region of Britain in the 70s and 80s CE. So if we zoom in, let's go to Vindolanda now. When you visit the site, you see this. You're wandering around and you were looking at stone remains. And I know Laura's smiling now because this is the kind of stuff that she was excavating when she was working there. Slightly different area of the site, but this is the classic, what you're looking at here is the classic playing card shaped Roman military fort. And what we mean by that is it's rectangular. It has corners, it has rounded corners there. And so we call this the playing card shape. This is the 3rd century fort that you're looking at here. Now, just to get your bearings straight a little bit, this is what the plan looks like. So the archaeological plan shows you everything. You were looking at that image from right here. Sorry, I'm on the wrong screen again. From right here on this corner and kind of looking in that direction. Now, before this talk, we did have somebody email in and say, oh, I visited the site in 1991 and they were wondering if we were gonna talk about anything that was new. Well, the new discoveries in 1991, just to point out, this fort right here, the only building you saw was that central structure right there. And everything else in the fort has been excavated since then. So in 1997 and 98, they did this building. In 2008, we did this building right here. And then in the subsequent years, all of this work. This was excavated in 1980, but was covered over. It's not consolidated for show. And then this is some new work by the team in the last couple of years. So there has been a huge amount of work and some really amazing and interesting things that have come out. And that's what I'm going to show you with the site of Vindolanda today. So here we have a thriving fort and settlement in the 3rd century CE. This is an image to show you what that all actually looks like. And the components of a military fort are on display really beautifully here. What you have is the playing card shaped fort that I told you about there. And then you have what we call the extramural settlement. You'll often hear that called the vicus. And the image that you're looking at here is just from this point. If you were sort of on a drone, so go up in the air, right above that star there, and you're looking in that direction, this is what you would see. You have the settlement in front of you with the bathhouse, the sort of mighty 3rd century bathhouse right here. A number of dwellings that probably had shops in the front, various kinds of shops all along the road front. To get your bearings straight, if you have visited the site, you bought your ticket up here, just to give you a sense of if you're looking at this and trying to figure things out, you bought your ticket actually off this picture up here. You may have seen our excavation huts and sheds and various things up here. And you walked down the flagstones of that original Roman road, and you came right through this settlement here and then into the fort. So that's your kind of main route through the site. So we have this component of extramural buildings where the families of the soldiers, merchants, and anybody else who would attach themselves to the garrison, they would live in here. And then you have the fort proper, the soldiers and all of that kind of official. The granaries are right here. This is the headquarters building, and then the house of the commanding officer. Now, I don't want to make you think that we do not have families living in the fort, because in fact, the family of the commanding officer, quite likely, if he was married, lived right here inside of the fort in that praetorium. So in fact, we do have women, children, families living all around this military settlement. And that's actually one of the real thrusts of my research, as Laura mentioned at the beginning, is looking at the sort of integral part that they played in military life, these non-soldiers and non-combatants. So when you are standing over here by the bathhouse, you're standing above the extramural settlement from the 3rd century, and you're looking down onto the fort plateau, a really lovely spot. Now, Vindolanda has a habit of finding amazing new things. And one of those things in the past slightly over a decade now, can't quite believe that, is this structure right here. Inside of the fort itself, and dating to the 3rd century, and probably with some slightly later phases as well, we found something called the Temple to Jupiter Dolicanus. And the reason why this is, if you know the military, you're thinking, oh, I know, I think that's a military cult. It is. The cult of Jupiter Dolicanus is common amongst military, but what we didn't expect, and what no one expected, was to find a temple inside of the fort itself. And that's precisely what we did here at Vindolanda. This space right here is, in fact, what we call a dolicanum, a large structure, fairly large. I mean, it's not a huge temple, that had all sorts of accoutrements, like a heated dining room and a little cult shrine area for the worship of Jupiter Dolicanus. And the way we know who the worship was is this wonderful inscription right over here, where you can see an inscription that tells us all about Jupiter Dolicanus, and the images on the side of the altar as well. So this is one of those fabulous things as an archaeologist, that you find an altar and you're able to really assign, what's going on and understand the structure, and it's just so exciting. And the image that you see up here is looking right down, again, a sort of aerial shot looking down onto that small shrine in the middle. So once again, Vindolanda came up with this thing that nobody expected, this very, very unusual building that of course, that came up at Vindolanda. And it's really shifting the way we think about religion within the military and where these spaces would have been. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, Vindolanda has in a way done it again, in the sense that there's also very recently, we've had, in fact, a report in press right now by Andrew Burley and the the team who excavated the newer parts of the fort. And it's looking like Vindolanda is shaping up to have been a fairly significant early Christian community as well. So now we're talking about sort of Vindolanda after the Romans, the sort of what we call sub-Roman period or late Roman period, or late Roman period, then sub-Roman period, and post-Roman period. So in fact, really, I'm not going to say much about this because the report is in press right now, but keep your eye on this space for Vindolanda becoming and sort of becoming much more of a part of the discussion of early Christianity in Britain at this time. So we're talking sort of, 5th century onward, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th centuries AD. Okay, but now I'm going to take us to the opposite end of the spectrum here of the timeline, and we're going to go all the way back to those early phases. So what we call the pre-Hadrianic period at Vindolanda, and I should say periods, really, we have several phases. And what we mean by that is what was there before Hadrian's Wall was built a few kilometers to the north of the site. So what lies beneath all of those stone remains that I just showed you is a number of large timber forts that are in anaerobic soil, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, that represent our earliest occupation on the site. And these date to somewhere between 85 CE and about 120, maybe as far as 130. But we've got these very, very significant forts, and they're all built in timber. And what you're looking at here is the site, the plan that you're used to seeing. And then this green is an outline, basically the footprint of the largest of those timber forts from period 4. And now all of that is underneath your feet. So if you have visited Vindolanda, you can get an idea from the images that I've just shown. You're walking down here underneath your feet, underneath all of this. You have these amazing timber remains of buildings and organic material and all sorts. So let's see what that looks like. I just want to return us quickly to this plan to show you that early frontier with sites like Vindolanda in the middle. Other sites have these early levels like Corbridge and Carlisle there, which actually is 2 of the even slightly earlier ones. And then a number. So Vindolanda isn't just standing alone on this early Stanegate frontier. And I put frontier in scare quotes because there's some debate about whether we can call it a frontier at this point. It's a line anyway. So Vindolanda really is the best explored. And this is what it looks like. What lies beneath all of those stones in anaerobic environments at Vindolanda are an incredible wealth of archaeological discovery, basically. So anaerobic, or sometimes also called anoxic preservation, is when you have archaeological layers that have no oxygen present, effectively no oxygen present in the soil environment. And then therefore you don't have the typical bacteria that you would find in oxidized environments. And therefore that bacteria doesn't break down organic materials. So the result is the preservation of materials that are not typically visible in the archaeological record. So things like leather and wood, bone you will find other places because it's fairly robust, but we get little tiny bone artifacts and all this incredible stuff. And other organic matter that you generally won't find in a non-anaerobic environment. So what you're looking at here are some people excavating this work. Some of you out there, I think, are going to recognize this guy right here. This is basically a new way of excavating. If you've ever been on an archaeological excavation, any archaeological excavation anywhere, you're looking at this and thinking, hot mess. Like, how do you even deal with this? Well, Robin Burley, back when he started to excavate these layers, realized that this needed a new technique. And what you basically do, what you see these 2 individuals here is Trudy Buck, who's actually another one of our specialists. She's a bioarchaeologist, and Alex Meyer right here. They are taking out squares, big chunks of material, basically. And this is the anaerobic material. You take out the biggest chunk that you can, and you slide it up to the people who are screening it up above you. And they have to painstakingly sort of peel apart all of these layers in order to get find what's in there. And you might be thinking, why not put it through a sieve? Does not go through a sieve. You have to just use your hands and pick apart piece by piece by piece. And I know my father-in-law's out there, and he has actually done this. And he can tell you how painstaking, in fact, it is. So, but the rewards are amazing because what you have in here are everything from very, very thin wooden writing tablets. And I'm sort of leaving you guys on a cliffhanger because the next talk is going to be really about what we find. This is going to be about the archaeology of it. So you're peeling these bits apart in order to find the objects, the artifacts, also the organic material that we would normally find. We do flotation, we do sieve a good deal of material, and you get all of your microbiology out of there, right? You get all of your environmental samples and all your bits and bobs that suggest what they're eating and what kind of pollen is in the soil. So there's all sorts of amazing results that come out of this. But then also something that is typically preserved, like metal, but is usually quite corroded, comes out of these layers pristine. You just flip a coin. It looks like the bronze coin still actually shines like gold. It's the original color of bronze. Iron, it doesn't have rust on it. It's quite amazing. So that's what the potential is for these layers. What you're looking at here is all those little white dots, those little white squares, actually. Those are all tags that are marking a post. And those posts are in a line, as you can see, and you have another line here and another line here. And those are the foundations of the structures. So it does, in fact, in the end, make sense. And you're probably also noticing that our water table is very high. Yes, it is. And we have to pump it out every morning. But you get used to working in these conditions and you realize what you can do and how you can do it. And it becomes a lot of fun, in fact. So what are the possibilities then? Something like this. You do not typically see this in on an archaeological site. This on the both sides, actually. These are just two different angles. I'm looking straight down on this image here and then at a slightly raking angle here. These are timber floorboards and the joists underneath, and then the sort of foundational joists that they would fit right into. So timber floorboards that are nearly 2,000 years old. These are from our period 4 occupation period. So that's about 105 to 120 AD. So it's just, you do not expect to find these things. So as an excavator, when you are working through this material, you find something like this, it really, the people that lived there and walked on these floors really kind of jump out at you. It really comes to light. The other possibility, other things that we find, again, Vindolanda surprising us. It always does. There's something new always coming out of this site. Back in 2003, I think it was, we found timber water pipes, also to period 4, dating to period 4 in this area, this time 105 to 120. And these were carrying fresh water across the site. So we often think, we always hear about those lead pipes of the Romans, and maybe that's what, ended the Roman Empire. It didn't. Don't listen to that. But we're always hearing about those sorts of things. But here we have Vindolanda, timber pipes that are carrying water across the site. So these literally went, through the entire excavation trench that year. They didn't just kind of, there weren't one or two of them. So these are really, really quite amazing, and something that sort of changed our whole idea of how they're delivering fresh water. And in fact, a lot of people suggest that there was a better system of fresh water delivery in Roman Britain than there was right up until maybe the 18th, 19th century in England. So there's quite a, they were quite sophisticated in what they could do. So another one of those amazing finds. Now, if we kind of zoom in on those small things, I am going to give you a few little tantalizing tidbits, but really I'm going to leave a cliffhanger here to show you that the kinds of things that come out are also just incredible. And my next talk will really zoom in on some of those amazing assemblages of material. But we find objects of wood and leather. So what you're looking at here is a box top that would have been turned on a lathe to make quite an intricate decoration here. It has split right there, unfortunately. The image on the right is showing you a wooden box that when opened, it still had its lid on, and when opened, it still had its contents inside. So that, of course, goes off to the lab and is evaluated. I can't remember if it was this one, or we have found a couple of these here and there, but things like makeup, cosmetic kind of things are found, medicinal things that maybe were medicinal. So it's really interesting. It gives us such a fantastic view onto life at this time. And then it's not just the buildings and whatnot that we find. We also have fort ditches that are absolutely full of, first of all, have either an anaerobic or a semi-anaerobic environment. and then are also full of amazing artifacts. And that's where we find a lot of shoes. We find plenty of shoes in buildings, but we find a lot of shoes in fort ditches. And you might be thinking, what is a fort ditch? What does that mean? Around every fort, pretty much every Roman fort, in this region anyway, I can't speak that the deserts, it would be very difficult to be doing this, but in this part of the world, you have ditches that would be dug, very large sometimes a meter, 2 meters deep, that would run around the entire fort. And essentially this is defensive. Sometimes you have 1, sometimes you have 5, sometimes I think the highest we have is 7 at one of the Hadrian's Wall forts. And these would be cleaned out when they're being used as defense. But when they are done, essentially, they kind of know they're getting lazy because they know they're going to leave the site. You know, they've gotten the word from the higher ups and they're going to be shipped off to another fort, and they stop cleaning these things out. And especially when they're about to leave, they throw everything into that fort, everything that they don't want to take with them in their pack, they chuck into that fort ditch. And it gives us this amazing idea of what they left behind. And in fact, I call this the abandonment horizon. And you're looking at a Severan period ditch that was absolutely chock-a-block with Roman shoes. In fact, in one excavation in 2016, out of this one section of this ditch, we found 420 shoes and upwards 480 leather items. If we bring in the other sections of this ditch that we excavated in 2004 and in 2002, this number goes up to, you know, up into the high hundreds, maybe even up to 1,000. I'm still counting, actually. So we have hundreds and thousands of Roman shoes that come out of this site from all of the different periods. So this case, you've got a ditch. And the reason why I'm showing you this picture, and you probably haven't picked up on this, but this right here is the toe of a shoe sticking out, and a whole bunch of things through here. Sometimes you can't tell the difference between leather and rock just in an image, but a whole bunch of these are actually shoes that are literally sticking out of the profile of the ditch. So we excavate this far because we have this nice big stone building above it, and we get a beautifully flat surface and we make a profile of it and we draw it and everything. And there are actually Roman shoes that are sort of sticking out and getting in the way of making a beautiful profile drawing, which is quite funny. And you're probably all thinking, wait a minute, Roman shoes? You have 2,000-year-old Roman shoes? Yes. And so let me show you some of those. Right here, we have thousands of Roman leather shoes, of Roman leather objects. And in fact, there are 7,315 leather small fine numbers. That includes everything from shoes to tent panels to, you know, toggles and all sorts of scraps and various things. But the highlight of all of that are the leather shoes. And that's what I'm actually going to be talking about next time. So I'm cliffhanging here and saying, okay, come back in 2 weeks and you can hear all about this. But just to give you a little teaser here, you're looking at this image on the bottom right, which we call the wall of shoes. This is in the Vindolanda Museum. And it's one of the first things you see. You walk in, you pay your ticket, sure. You go to the left and you have this wall of shoes, and the lighting is all very nice. And it is really to highlight not only the shoes, but the Vindolanda curators. What they really want for people is to come into the museum and see this not as a bunch of, you know, gold and metal items that are all fancy, but rather to understand the people that lived at the site. And what better to do that than the footwear, than the shoes of people. So you are faced with this wall of shoes, and as you walk through the museum, you will see more throughout because of this notion of thinking about the people that lived at Vindolanda. So we have upwards of over 7,000 items, over 5,000 of those we think are shoes, and some of them are just fantastic. So you see this image right here with a cutout pattern on the leather in really good shape. Over here, you have an ubiquitous military boot. I say that because we have literally thousands of them. This closed boot, lace holes up the front, very simple utilitarian for marching and walking in the military. And these also represent the people. The reason why that one slide said finding the community at Vindolanda, we're thinking about those people, and it really comes to home. It hits home when you see something like this. These are shoes that belong to probably adolescents or children. You've got some a small pair right here, an individual shoe right here. Most of our shoes are individuals. We do have plenty of pairs, but most of the shoes are individuals. And you can see, again, this very nice cutout pattern for a shoe that belonged to maybe a sort of 12-year-old, 10 or 12-year-old. And so these really tell us about the people that lived at this site and who they were and how they expressed themselves with adornment and footwear and various things. And I'm going to leave you with that. And I'm going to ask you to come back to my next talk, where I'm really going to be talking about these shoes and all of the intricate finds and what they tell us about the different periods of occupation at the site. And I'll leave you back to that beautiful picture of Vindolanda with the sun rising over the hill. And the sun does shine in the UK, it really does. So thank you very much for everyone who attended, and I will be taking questions. Laura will get them through the chat. So shoot, anything you want to ask.
That was absolutely amazing, and I want to go back. I'm so sad that we missed this last year, but hopefully I will be there in June and ready to get muddy again. So we have quite a few questions. Gail Peters is asking, was the area at Hadrian's Wall more forested during Roman times?
Great question. We always have these questions of, who deforested the area, et cetera, et cetera. And the answer is probably no. When the folks who do this sort of thing, so the environmental archaeologists and the ones who look at all what we call eco-facts as opposed to artifacts, when they look at these layers, it became pretty clear at a certain point that, in fact, a lot of deforestation happened closer to around 200 BCE. Now these are things that I remember, learning about and hearing about 10 years ago. So that could have changed. Maybe that's nuanced now. But it looks like when the Romans got there, it wasn't as forested as we at one point thought. It's easy to think that the Romans are the big baddies and they, of course, deforested because they did all the bad things. But it does look like there was a fair amount of deforestation before they got there already.
And Jane Holland asks, why are the corners of the fort rounded?
Great question. Why are the corners of the fort rounded? Well, when I can go all the way back to that. When you look at sort of construction of this kind of, I don't know what it's doing now. It's got a life of its own now. When you think about the construction of the fort, and what I want to show you is that, there we go, that image right there. You can see that each of these have a tower right there. Sometimes you actually get a toilet block in the corner. And in fact, we have a huge toilet block over in this corner. But it is kind of easier to just round. When you're thinking about construction, it's easier to just kind of do a nice little rounded thing. But then it also allows you to much easier put a building in that corner. So that would be my guess. Also going around the fort, you would have a rampart, which this really would have been, other than where you have buildings, we have a building over here, you've got towers at the gates, and we've got that building over here, that dolicanum, that temple space. But otherwise you would have a rampart, which was a big mound of earth that would slope up to the top of the wall. Perhaps you'd have stairs going up. And then we also know that they had fires and sort of cooking areas in the ramparts as well in certain forts. So it would really be a lot easier to put that structure in the corner and utilize the space. If it were square, it would be very difficult to get in there. And also it's just a little bit easier to make something rounded.
All right, Scott Mansky, I hope I'm not bastardizing your name. What was the source material of Hadrian's Wall and the forts? Is the stone all derived very locally, or were there a few master quarries that supplied most of the stone?
Oh, that's a great question too, because I don't know if anyone sort of looked at the stone of the Windsill and knows anything about geology, but that is in fact a dolerite. And dolerite is not a good building stone at all. So you're probably thinking, oh, well, there we go, perfect. Just, cut down all that stone, haul it up 100 feet, and there you go, build your wall. But not true at all. The wall and most of the forts are built of a combination. There's sandstone and limestone in the area. We do know about a couple of quarries. There's this amazing thing called, I don't know, Laura, if you saw this when you were visiting, but there's an amazing thing called limestone corner along the wall where they actually dug, there's a ditch that runs north of the wall just to protect the whole length of it. And there's actually a ditch to the south of the wall as well called the Valum. But these ditches, one of them was dug directly through a limestone, basically it became a limestone quarry. So it's quite incredible. So we do know a couple of the areas right above Vindolanda. Actually, if I go back to that beautiful picture at the beginning and the end, right above on that hill, the Barkham Hill. So up here, you can't see it because of what the sun is doing, but there actually are two faces right here as well. Now, it's unlikely that they were driving stone all the way from there, all the way up to Hadrian's Wall. Certainly, we have marks that suggest that was a Roman quarry. And certainly Vindolanda would have probably been built from some of that. But there are enough sandstone, it seems that there are enough sandstone and limestone quarries along Hadrian's Wall to support it. Now, to answer the question of whether there was one huge one, there wasn't. We don't have any evidence that there was one massive, like the Carrara marble coming from outside of Rome, right? We don't have something like that. But there does seem to be a number of small ones. Now, there have been in the past sort of decade or so, there have been the Geological Society has actually been doing thin sections of some of our stones from different periods and then cruising around the landscape to see what they can find. And I think that that's still ongoing. So watch this space. I think there'll be more information there. Oh, you're muted, Laura.
Sorry about that. Unfortunately, we have so many questions we could go on all day, but we have to let Beth go and, you know, study more shoes for our next talk. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have both you and Dr. Greene sharing this unbelievable site. Truly, you need to get there when we can all travel again. If you enjoyed this lecture, we encourage you to donate on either our website at archaeological.org/donate or simply text donate to 833-965-2840. And please join us February 11th. She has teased us dramatically with what is there, and trust me, you want to see it. It's fabulous. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Greene, for all your experience and knowledge, and it was a delight, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me very much. It's been great.